Soviet Union to keep the Soviet Union from coming into Europe and taking over Europe.
Would this be a good time to talk about the Pope's relationship with Hitler prior to this event? I mean, Pope Pius XII gets a rap in history of.
That's very important. That when Hitler decided to go into Rome, it wasn't just to get even with him because of the fact that he thought that the Pope had something to do with what happened to Mussolini. As a matter of fact, there was no evidence of that whatsoever, but this is what Hitler thought. But there was more than that. Hitler and the Pope had been bitter enemies for many, many years. I know there are some books that have come out. I think there's one called Hitler's Pope, which tried to make it look as if the Pope, you can tell by the very title, that the Pope was in cahoots with Hitler and was taking orders from Hitler. This simply isn't true. The two men despised each other to the extent that in 1939, shortly after the Pope came to power, took over as Pope, he joined in a plot by German militarists, some German militarists who wanted to overthrow Hitler. And they asked him if he wouldn't join them in this plot, and he agreed. And his job was to contact the British and get British support for the plot, and the Pope was ready to give all kinds of military information and everything to the British. So you can see, and the idea was to overthrow Hitler and, if necessary, kill him. And the Pope agreed to this, and I was told this by a very high Vatican official, as a matter of fact, that the Pope was ready to see Hitler killed if necessary, because that's how much he hated him. So this whole idea that that the Pope was
anti-Semitic,
was a friend and a supporter of Hitler is completely cockeyed. Now this is very important in the reason. This is an important reason why Hitler was out to get the Pope, because each of them feared and hated the other. The Pope hated Hitler because not only because of his inhuman policies, but because he was convinced that Hitler was out to destroy the church, and he was right. Hitler was out to destroy the church. On the other hand, Hitler feared the Pope because he was afraid that, for one thing, he saw the Pope as one of his great competitors after the war, because he thought he was going to win the war, of course, Hitler did. And he thought that after the war, he wanted to control all these countries that he took over, and he wanted to be their spiritual leader as well as their political leader. As a matter of fact, Hitler's ultimate aim was to destroy Christianity as such and start a new Nazi religion with himself as their spiritual as well as political leader. And so he saw the Pope standing in his way, of course. And so that's one reason why he hated him. And also he was afraid that the Pope would speak out publicly against the Holocaust, because the population in Germany was about 40% Catholic, and this was about the same percentage of in the army, where about 40% of the people in the armed forces were Catholic. And if the Pope spoke out, Hitler was afraid that this would really demoralize the army. With such a tremendous percentage of people, being good Catholics, and ironically, the Pope was afraid that Hitler, that if he spoke out, that's one of the reasons why he didn't. He was afraid that Hitler, that most of the Catholics might turn to Hitler rather than him and abandon the church, because many of the bishops, the Catholic bishops in Germany, they were influenced by Hitler. Actually, they were. I would say that they were intimidated by Hitler, because Hitler didn't, was threatened, and many of these prelates, the Catholic prelates, put many of them in jail, killed even some,
right.
And they were afraid that if they went against Hitler, that they would all be killed. And so, anyway, the Pope was afraid that that
Hitler would come. I thought it was interesting
that his own people there would turn against him. That's one of the reasons why he didn't want to speak out. But basically, he didn't want to speak out because he saw his whole purpose on earth was to protect and save the church, of which he was the head. And he had played, even before he became Pope, he played a big role in strengthening the church, probably stronger than ever. It became probably stronger than ever was in history, consolidating it and unifying it. And to see his handiwork suddenly disappear, and when God put him on earth in order to save to protect the church and keep it eternal. And the basic reason why he didn't want to speak out is because he knew and he felt that Germany, that Hitler would attack the Vatican and try to destroy it, and not only himself but the whole Catholic structure. If he spoke out, so he found himself in a very, very agonizing dilemma. On the one hand, he did really want to save the Jews, but on the other hand, he also wanted to save the church, and so there you had it. He was in this great dilemma, and so he tried to help them without speaking out. He did open up all the church. He made it clear to the clergy that without putting it in writing, because he was afraid of putting it in writing, Hitler would find it, and that could mean the end of the church. But he made it clear to them through word of mouth and other ways that all the Vatican institutions and the churches should be open to Jews who needed to be saved. And so he tried his best to do it in that way, but he didn't want to speak out loudly and publicly because he was afraid that this could end the church, and of course Hitler's aim was to end the life of the church.
I'm reminded of that part you mentioned a few minutes ago about how he had thought of himself as becoming a spiritual leader in this new, the 1,000-year reign, because he had. Himmler had even said at one point that he had to do the dirty work so that the new Messiah, Hitler, could be sinless, and that's why he took it upon himself to live out the Holocaust in that self-sacrificing way, so that Hitler would be above criticism somehow, which just seems insane to think, but that's how warped it was. And then the other part I just wanted to highlight was you were talking about the Pope Pius XII, is that, there were a lot of people that say to this day that he was anti-Semitic. How did he turn, in what ways did he turn a blind eye to the Holocaust? Are there verifiable ways that he did allow things to happen in order to save the church that are sort of an uncomfortable Sophie's choice?
Well, basically, what he did was just to not speak out loudly, because he knew that if he did, that the church might disappear. As a matter of fact, before he became Pope, he had written some material, encyclicals and so forth, that would indicate that he was. Hitler was a danger to the Jews and others, and Hitler had reacted so strongly, threatening the Pope, threatening to take over the Vatican and everything. That just about everything that could happen to the church, he was right. Promising to do. It scared Pius, and after that, he was really afraid that Hitler was really going to go through with a plot to get rid of the church.
Well, I don't want to get too far off track, because we really wanted to lay out then exactly what Wolf's plan was. So sketch it out for us in just a few minutes of how he thought he might be able to kidnap the Curia, to loot the Vatican and kidnap the Pope, perhaps having to kill all of those people. But how did he see that happening?
Well, he didn't actually see it happen because he was determined to,
right.
to stop it.
But as he had to sketch out a way of doing it, how did he see that is even possible?
Well, he didn't really think it was possible, although I'll tell you, if Hitler had told him, look, either you do it now or you're dead, he would have found a way to do it, to go through with it. But he joined with these, as I mentioned, Ambassador von Weizsäcker and other, I go into it in detail, of course, in my book, a special mission, but he got together with not only Weizsäcker but with other political leaders. I mentioned their names before, and
right.
Political and military leaders.
Sure.
And they more or less had a conspiracy to try to save the Pope. And one of the basic things that they decided together was that to convince the Pope that when Hitler's people went in to take over the Jews, and they were going to send in trucks to take him to the train which would take them to Auschwitz. They were afraid that the Pope now finally would speak out, because he'd have to. Because before he thought he could get away without speaking out and still help the Jews and save the church. But when the Jews were taken from right under his window, so to speak,
right,
right in Rome. After all, the Jews in Rome were his neighbors. That he would be forced to speak out, and that's what they were worried about, because they knew that if the Pope spoke out, that this would absolutely make it certain that Hitler would not change his mind about taking over the Vatican and destroying
sure.
and killing a lot of people, including maybe the Pope. So that was the situation then, and now you might ask, what exactly was this plot? That's what I was trying to get you to get.
What exactly was the plot? And I guess now, again, once more, we're kind of at the end of the half hour, so that's what I was trying to get at. And the secret plot was, Dan, you want to pick it up there?
Okay, but just before I get to that, perhaps I should just finish the thought about how these people who were trying to save the Pope, how they hope to proceed and how they hope to change Hitler's mind.
I'm afraid if you put anything else after the secret plot was, there will be an insurrection. I'm afraid that people will storm the studio with pitchforks and torches. I think I want to hear about that, but I think it's really cool to hear exactly what the plot was before we undo it. Let's hear what it was.
Okay. The plot was that a group of SS men would go into the Vatican dressed in Italian army uniforms, and they would take over the Vatican and everything in it, and they would kill all the cardinals, the curia, and then they would kidnap the Pope and make it appear as if he were trying to escape, and then would kill him too. Now, that was the idea. But after the first group went in, of SS men went in, another group of German soldiers would come, and they would see these men, in the Italian uniforms, and they would kill their own compatriots, thinking that they were Italians who had done all this bloodshed. So this was a very cynical plot by Hitler to try to kill all the witnesses, so he could then blame it on the Italians for killing the Pope and the rest, and the Curia and taking over the Vatican.
Kind of a false flag operation. Interestingly enough, then too, if they wanted to kidnap him instead of kill him, they could do the same sort of thing, but then instead of having the Pope be killed, they could come in and kill these Italian soldier-dressed Nazis and tell everybody, we are saving the Pope, and take him back to Germany or wherever they were going to take him and protect him with the evidence appearing as though somebody else were coming in to take over the Vatican other than them.
Yeah, that's basically exactly what the plot was. And I'll tell you, Wolf, he was faithful to the SS. He loved the SS. He saw it as the great elite of the German people. And I think that he would have been reluctant in any case to see his own people killed in this plot. But in any event, of course, he and the others that I mentioned, these other anti-Hitler people, worked to try to get Hitler to change his mind and frustrate the plot.
Well, let's pick up on how he sabotaged his own plot next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Dan Kurzman, also the author of one of the definitive books on the USS Indianapolis called Fatal Voyage, a great writer, and wonderful stories, often untold stories, even in the plain sight of history. This would be one where Dan had to do a little digging over the last couple of decades to get the full story of a special mission. So as we laid it out, he had this plot to go in and to be able to make it appear as though the Nazis were saving the Pope, at the same time achieving Hitler's goal of wiping out the Curia. Tell me more about what they plan to do with the treasure. How did they plan on extracting the treasure from the Vatican? Do we go into details on that?
Well, they got in touch with a lot of translators of Greek, Latin, and other languages to get everything that they could out of the books and so forth. And the treasures would just be taken. There were to be about 2,000. The plan called for about 2,000 troops to go in there and extract all the treasures and whatever they could be found, and bring it to Germany.
What was the plan then, to melt it down the gold, or I mean, do they get into?
There was nothing in the plot that I saw that this was indicated, but
okay.
I guess they would have done that.
Okay.
Because most of the treasures actually were involved the ancient books and so forth. The one thing that Hitler wanted to do, and particularly his secretary, the guy who perhaps had more influence on him than anybody else, was Martin Bormann, who wanted to find material which would prove that the popes were involved in trying to hurt Germany in the past, and that anything against the Vatican would be justified, and they were trying to find all kinds of material of that nature.
Yeah, to justify attack. I thought it was interesting, and it's a little sidebar piece. It kind of bugged me. Not that you wrote it, but just the whole truth of it is that Himmler reports one of the ways in which Himmler justifies that he's not a total animal is this little anecdote about how he let Baron von Rothschild go. Is that true?
Yeah, when the Germans invaded Austria, they found Baron von Rothschild there, and of course he was one of the top Jewish leaders in Europe. In certain, one of the
banking leader and a very wealthy man,
right? And one of the most important people they could have found. And under Wolf's influence, actually, Himmler permitted him to go, but I think he had to pay an awful lot of money to do that. And Rothschild, of course, had the money to do it, so he really bought his way out of it.
Yeah, the very thought, though, that Rothschild saved his own skin while perhaps giving enough money to Himmler for him to be able to finance the final solution so that other Jews would go to the death camps.
Well, supposedly the money that was given by Rothschild was to pay for the cost of sending the Jews to other places where they would be safe. But of course, who knows what happened to the money?
Right, exactly. All right, so we know the plot. I mean, what Hitler had in mind and what General Karl Wolff was going to do, but except Hitler didn't know that Karl Wolff had no intention of following through on this plan. Instead, he was already looking for his ticket out of Nuremberg. He was already seeing that the end of the war was not going to end favorably for Germany, so he wanted somebody like the Pope to be an angel for him at the end of the war.
What he did was, he and these others, Ambassador Weizsäcker and these others anti-Hitler people in Rome and the Vatican, they let the Pope know that there was this plot. Of course, the Pope was not too surprised because he knew that Hitler for years had wanted to get him. But here was a very specific plot, and they warned him that if he spoke out, and as I mentioned before, the Nazis were afraid that he would speak out now because how could he keep silent? They felt when when the Jews are taken from right under his window, so to speak, and so they warned him. Basically, in a sense, it was a sort of a blackmail to save his own skin. That he should remain quiet when the Jews were taken out of Rome, and in other words, they more or less said choose between speaking out and saving the Vatican, and so they put him in the Pope in a very difficult moral position. But as I say, the argument then comes down to whether or not the Pope was justified in keeping quiet, and this is, of course, an argument that's still raging today.
Right.
About
the beatification of Pope Pius XII.
Yeah, and so you see arguments on both sides.
Right. It's interesting that he didn't say more. It's one thing if he didn't speak up about the deportation of the Jews for fear that it would accelerate a greater deportation of the Jews, and then also the consequence of Hitler invading the Vatican. If he didn't say that about Jews, okay, I wouldn't agree with that, but that's what his decision was. It's surprising to me that he wasn't more aware of and fighting more for the execution of Catholics, which was also going on at a fairly astounding rate in the concentration camps.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point. See, that's why he wasn't really anti-Semitic. He wasn't to just say, you feel, well, they're only Jews. Never mind what happened to them. The idea was that if he irritated Hitler to a certain degree, he knew that he would be out, and so would the church, and so. That's even when Catholics were involved. For example, in Poland, Poland is mostly a Catholic country,
right?
And they weren't sent to the gas chambers of Poles, but they were given slave labor, and they were treated terribly. And there were people in Poland who begged him to speak out against that, and he wouldn't do that either, for the same reason that he wouldn't speak out against the Jews. In other words, it wasn't a question of who you were, but of what would happen if he spoke out. What I try to do in my book here is to just sort of give the bottom line of the two arguments, which I might just quote myself here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the kernel of the critics' argument, those who criticize the Pope. If the Pope had publicly and explicitly spoken out, several 100,000 more victims might have been deported. But millions might have been saved. If he remained silent publicly, several 100,000 might have remained safe, but several million were certain to die. In other words, so this was the argument of the critics, that even though the Pope was saving hundreds of thousands of Jews in various institutions and all, they might they might be saved, but at the cost of millions of other Jews. So that's the basic argument. On the other hand, and they're asking, was it morally justifiable to witness a crime without crying out to the heavens in protest, whatever the risk or sacrifice? And as I put it, if only to reassure future generations that man has not lost his soul. On the other hand, the kernel of the supporters' answer, those who supported the Pope, was expressed by von Kessel when I spoke with him. Von Kessel was the assistant to Ambassador Weizsäcker, who was, of course, the ambassador to the Vatican, and he told me that using pragmatic logic, and he was very anti-Hitler. As a matter of fact, he was involved in a plot to kill Hitler a number of times. He said, we were convinced that a fiery protest by Pius XII against the persecution of the Jews would have in all probability put both the Pope himself and the Curia into extreme danger, but would certainly not have saved the life of a single Jew, because according to him and to others, who knew Hitler, they said that if the Pope had spoken out, he wouldn't just say, well, okay, Hitler wouldn't have just said, since he spoke out, let's give up the Holocaust. But instead, that he would have gone into all these different institutions where the Jews are hiding and take even more. And that, in other words, that if he'd spoken out, more Jews would have been killed than if he hadn't spoken out. So this is their argument. And of course, it's a moral argument against a pragmatic argument. This argument is going on today, as it has been since that play, the Deputy, by Rolf Harcourt, came out in the 1950s, and saying, making the Pope look like really an evil man. Right. But the thing is, I think it should be understood that the Pope was not anti-Semitic. He did this for practical reasons to save the Church, but not because he was anti-Semitic. As a matter of fact, his closest childhood friend was a Jewish boy with whom he kept in contact throughout his life, and in fact, he helped to save this boy and his family by helping them to get to Jerusalem to avoid the fascist and the Nazi effort against the Jews. So there's nothing really that would. I did a lot of exploration of this question that would show that he was an anti-Semite
or Hitler's Pope.
Yeah, and that is really an unfair statement, I think. As a matter of fact, he once quoted. He was quoted as saying, "It's impossible for a Catholic to be anti-Semites. Spiritually, all of us are Semites." And I think that's really the way he felt. But he just, his first priority was to save the Church.
Sure. A Special Mission is the name of the book, Hitler's Secret Plot to Seize the Vatican and Kidnap Pope Pius XII. You've never seen this story laid out like this, especially Dan Kurzman's the author. You know what, though? It makes me wonder, what would have happened if Pope Pius XII had said this, as you made the point to say that the German Wehrmacht and let's put the SS aside, but that 40% of the population and presumably 40% of Hitler's army was Catholic, and a greater percentage of them maybe being Lutheran, but also not disrespecting the Pope, might have found this very interesting too. If the Pope had come out and voiding both of those options that you talked about, the Pope had just said, I am asking that all good Catholic soldiers in the German army right now lay down their weapons. You are fighting an immoral war, and you are following an immoral leader, a murderer. It is better to die on the battlefield than to kill on the battlefield. If he had said that, what might have happened?
Well, I think it would be clear that Hitler would have gone right into the Vatican one way or the other much earlier than he did. And would have, because Hitler was. That's exactly what Hitler was afraid of, and he was ready to really take action. And it just by some miracle that the plot was not implemented in the end.
I guess.
But the fact is, if he'd have come out and said that, I don't think there would have been any question, but that he would have attacked the Vatican.
Yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of, from a Christian mindset of what would Jesus do, I would just wonder what would have happened if the Pope had been willing to martyr himself in that sense. Then, if that's the guarantee of history that Hitler would have done that, it still would have been calling for the right thing in asking these soldiers to lay down their arms.
Right. Well, of course, that's the argument against the Pope.
Yeah.
We'll get the other argument is what would have been gained by that. More Jews would have been killed, and Hitler wouldn't have ended the Holocaust, and so more Jews would have been killed, and would Christ have wanted that? So that's the question that's the other side asks.
Fair enough. I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to open up the last hour here for phone calls for Dan Kurzman. It could be about both this book, A Special Mission, Hitler's Secret Plot to Seize the Vatican and Kidnap Pope Pius XII, or it could be about any of his other books, including that on the Juno or the Indianapolis, or if you're familiar with other books as well. But I want you to, when we come back at the top of the hour, I'd love to have you go through what does happen then to General Wolfe at the end of the war. Obviously, he ends up in jail, so it's not as though the Pope looked out for him and said, oh, can't touch this guy. The only two lines we have open are west of the Rockies and the international line. Those are ringing, too, so hang on. If you want to get through, we'll get you a minute. Let's clear out some callers, get some questions and comments about the new book, about the special mission to kidnap and or kill the Pope during World War II, just getting play in this new book on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. You can link up to Dan Kurzman through coasttocoastam.com. A Special Mission is the book. Let's go to the phones. Dr. Francis is in New York for Dan Kurzman on Coast to Coast AM.
Yes, there's several things that kind of disturb me, with the discourse this evening. And the first is, Dan seems to have forgotten about the Concordate, which Pacelli or Pius XII demanded and got. And in the Concordate, it actually told the German Catholics to follow Hitler and to abandon their political parties that challenged the Nazis, such as the Catholic Socialists and other parties in different areas of Germany, such as Munich or Bavaria, etc. Also, the fact that, in a sense, Pacelli committed, or Pius XII, committed with his knowledge of the Holocaust, a sin of omission or a sin of commission. The papal nuncio in Switzerland.
I'm just really curious. Wait, Dr. Francis, I'm just curious. How is it that you think we didn't talk about that? Didn't we just talk about whether the kind of the Sophie's choice that he had? I'm trying to understand your point of view on this, just because I know you can.
Ian, your question was very good that you raised regarding what if Pius the 12th did this. Wouldn't it have affected change? But what I'm trying to say is the Concordate told all the good German Catholics to follow Hitler and basically don't challenge the system. In fact, it demanded that the German Catholic parties that challenged Nazism were disbanded. And it allowed, in a sense, for Hitler to get into power because he didn't have that opposition after the Concordate was signed. Basically, what it meant was that Nazi Germany paid the Vatican the fees for Catholic education. So the Catholic education fees were paid by the government.
Oh, that's right. But what year was that, just so I understand? What year was that?
The Concordate was signed in the 1930s.
Okay, go ahead.
Also, what I want to
wait. Let's give Dan a chance to answer there, too. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay.
Well, I go into the question of the Concordat. The thing is that the Pope, he saw that Hitler wanted to destroy the church from the beginning as soon as he came into power. And his only chance, as he saw it, was to sign a concordat with Germany, with Hitler, in which there would be complete separation between church and state. As a matter of fact, he would have to give up the Pope would have to give up any support, political support. Like there was the only Democratic Party left in Germany at the time was a party which supported the church, and so he would have to give that up. And so there was a complete separation. Well, the point is that Hitler was really putting a gun to the Pope's head. Hitler was ready to destroy the church unless the Pope agreed to sign. Of course, at that time, there was the Pope was Pope Pius the 11th. That was before Pacelli became president. Became Pope. So
hang on. Both people are talking at the same time.
From the Pope's point of view, and from Pacelli's point of view, the alternative to a concordat was the destruction of the German church, and so that doesn't mean that was a good thing to have the concordat, but it was better than that being destroyed from his point of view, from Pacelli's point of view.
When he was papal nuncio in Berlin. So in a sense, Pacelli knew what was happening, and what I wanted to also say is I would disagree. If Pacelli understood that, it was a mistake for the Vatican to sign the Concordat. I wanted to say this, though, that the Vatican nuncio in Switzerland was aware of the International Zionist Organization that informed the Vatican of the extermination of the Jews. In fact, it was from Pacelli's office that he could actually see the trains taking the Italian Jews out of Italy. And he chose nothing. He chose to pray in silence. He chose to pray for Hitler's soul in silence. He wasn't courageous like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who opposed Nazism and evil.
Well, wait, hold on a second. I just want to stay kind of in control a little bit of this because it just seems sort of like you want to go off on a diatribe, and I totally get that. But I mean, I guess the initial point was you sort of felt like Dan didn't address that. We didn't get into it on the air, although we did sort of symbolically in the discussion we had. But it's all over the book, and just so you know, I
wanted to say this too. That
it's like dozens of pages in the book.
Okay, but Martin Bormann's son became a Catholic priest, so the notion that Bormann would actually participate in, destroying the Vatican or kidnapping the Pope or something is preposterous. In fact, his son, Indulus' son, of the OSS, went into the same order after the war. So this notion, I think these are issues that have to be looked at critically, and I would say that I don't think Pacelli or Pius XII is worthy of canonization or beatification because he represents, dealing with evil and not challenging it. And
hold on. Honestly, I mean, can I just say, I don't think Dan's making an argument.
This is such a distortion of the situation that it is almost not even worth discussing, because the fact is that Hitler and the Pope hated each other. They feared each other. And that the Pope, when he signed the Concordat, he did it with a gun to his head. And of course, he could have said, "I won't agree to separate the
church and state
from the state." But there would have been no church perhaps after that. I'm not arguing that he should have. Sure, you can argue that he should have been willing to see the church destroyed as a matter of as a matter of morality. Okay, you can say that. But the point is that he didn't do it because he favored Hitler. He did it to try to protect himself from Hitler, and so there's a big difference there. But you can argue, of course, that the Pope and the church should have sacrificed itself completely. That's an argument because from the moral point of view, you're ready to give up your whole your existence.
Right. Well, let's just leave it. Let's just leave it.
Say that he did it for evil purposes. I'm sorry, I disagree with you.
Well, I just want to leave it there because I don't. I think he's somehow mistaking the idea that you're making an argument for Pope Pius's sainthood, and I don't.
I'm not.
That's not really. You're not at all.
It's
So I think
that's
what he's mistaking.
I'm not a Catholic, and that's for the Catholics to decide who their saint is. I've never met a saint in my life. I'm certainly not a saint, so I'm in no position to judge whether anybody else should be.
Well, let's leave it there for now and just say I think he might really enjoy reading your book, and whatever it was that he felt like arguing about may be better taken up with somebody who's making that argument. Let's go wildcard line. Christian's in Texas on Coast to Coast AM for Dan Kurzman. Christian? or go to Jeff, I'm sorry. Jeff is in Nashville on Coast to Coast AM. Jeff?
Hey, Ian. Great. It's a great show tonight, guys, and really, who would want to follow that?
Thank you. We want you to.
Yeah, okay. My giant question I have kind of follows along the same line you were doing with the hypothetical, which was if Pope Pius had really kind of taken the literal standpoint of what would Jesus do, and actually kind of sacrificed himself instead of the Jews, instead of saying, okay, you know what, you can have the Vatican, you can have this because this is all material, it doesn't matter. The church is in the hearts, it's not in the place.
Right.
As long as you leave these Jews alone, and you leave.
It'd be interesting to think what would happen.
Yeah. My only question is to your guest, Dan, I think it was. What would be your opinion? You've studied all of this now, especially all of the situation, and you certainly know this side of Hitler and Hitler and all those guys. What would be your opinion on what that would be?
What would have happened?
I'm not quite clear of the question.
He was saying, what if, taking my proposal that he had just decided to martyr himself, take your best guess as to what you really do think would have happened if he had said, you know what, I cannot let this happen. I'd rather die myself than to see this happen.
Well, he may have died, and history may have said he was a great man. He would have been the greatest saint of all. I don't know, but the point is, I'm just arguing from his point of view that why he did this. Whether it's justified or not is a question for others to answer, or for history to answer. I'm just saying that he didn't do it because he was anti-Semitic. He didn't remain quiet because he was anti-Semitic. He didn't do it because he liked Hitler. He did it because he wanted to save the church. You can argue that he should have let the church go and let the whole
right.
Vatican be destroyed. And that's a good argument. You can have an argument like that. But I'm saying that I'm just trying to point out the motivations for this, and whether you agree with the motivations is another question.
It's part of, but it's not the central story to a special mission, Hitler's secret plot to seize the Vatican and kidnap Pope Pius XII. Beth is in British Columbia on the wildcard line on Coast to Coast AM for Dan Kurzman. Beth?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
We're all wonderful, thank you.
Good. I have 3 very important questions.
Put your most important one first in case we don't get to the other 2.
Okay. What role does he see that the church at present, headed by Pope Benedict, is playing in the role of partisan with the New World Order?
Okay, I don't know that Dan would be prepared to answer that, but Dan, do you want to take a swipe at that?
Well, I'm not really acquainted with the situation as it is now with the present Pope.
Okay.
I'm just a layman on that, but I think that I do know, basically what happened, during World War II.
World War II. Your other question, Beth?
My other question was he aware that the occult was used by the Nazis, and that as an occultist, after 6 years membership in the occult, they have to join a church?
Who are you referring to?
I'm not sure I know about that.
I'm referring to people who became active in the Nazi movement.
Yes.
Right.
Who employed the occult, which was largely used in the war. Hitler referred to
right.
the occult and referred to
right.
Occult sciences
right.
in order to further himself.
Right.
So as a occultist, one would have to join a church, a regular church, a Christian church.
I've never heard that part.
It's told to me by a ex-Satanist.
Well, I'll tell you,
that may be true.
My book does not deal with that aspect of the
Yeah.
situations, and so I don't think I'm qualified to answer that.
Now, it was interesting, though, and this, I think, that last part, I just never heard that piece, although that certainly, it would capture the imagination to think that there's all these sort of secret occultist agents working within Christian churches. But it is interesting, though, Dan, and I think this part she would really enjoy reading in the book, was really how there was all of this sort of new world religion being built around Hitler, and I think that part is really very compelling. And I especially as much as Himmler was buying into it.
Wanted to have a Nazi religion based on his own ideology, in which he would be the spiritual leader of the world. That was his whole idea. He wanted to. That's why he wanted. He saw the Pope as the principal religious leader standing in his way, because he was the most important individual leader and individual religious leader, and he wanted to get rid of him. Basically, that was it. And incidentally, I might point out that what happened when the Jews, when the Nazis went in to round up the Jews. Because that's rather important to know what happened. Because I interviewed Princess Pignatelli, who was a close friend of the Pope, and on the morning of October 16th, 1943, she got a telephone call from a friend of hers that says, "Do something. You're the friend of the Pope. Go to him and stop what's going on now. The Jews are being rounded up in their homes, and you've got to stop it. You've got to get the Pope to stop this." So the princess told me that she ran over to she went over to the Vatican, and where the Pope was actually at Mass at the time, and she dragged him out, and she says, "You've got to do something about the Jews." And he acted as if he didn't know anything about this. I mean, he said, "But they promised me they wouldn't touch the Jews." So in any case, what he did was ask his or order his Secretary of State Cardinal Magnoni to immediately see Weizsäcker, the
ambassador,
German ambassador, and they had a meeting which was really extraordinary, because Magnoni said that if the Germans did not stop the roundup, that the Pope would feel it absolutely necessary to speak out. This is the first time he was ready to give up, this idea that if he spoke out, something might happen to the church. And as a matter of fact, he said, the Pope is ready to leave it to divine providence to decide what will happen afterwards. And so this is one of the main reasons why, why Hitler in the end finally agreed to stop the roundup, but the guy who really I think performed perhaps the final the final action which made Hitler change his mind was Wolf, who was in Germany, and he told Hitler that if it didn't stop, the Italians would rise up. There was a lot of anarchy in Italy then after Mussolini was thrown out, and the communists might take over. And he didn't. Wolf, who was head of the SS troops in Italy, said he didn't think he would have the power to be able to stop such a revolt. And so that, together with the Pope's threat, finally convinced Hitler to stop the
deportation,
the roundup of the Jews,
right.
And so once the roundup was stopped, and it was stopped after only 1,000 of the 8,000 Jews in Rome were taken to their death camps. So 7,000 of them managed to survive, and so the Pope then didn't find it necessary to speak out. But I believe that if the roundup had continued, the Pope would have spoken out.
We have a full boat of calls. Everybody wants to talk with Dan Kurzman, and you will next. A special mission, Hitler's secret plot to seize the Vatican and kidnap Pope Pius XII, next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Back to your questions for Dan Kurzman. Stuart is in Texas on the wild card line on Coast to Coast AM. Stuart, you're talking to Dan.
Hello. Mr. Kurtzman, I have a question I'd like to ask you. It might be beyond your realm of expertise, but I want to ask you a question about Adolf Hitler. Is that all right?
Sure.
I want to preface it by saying this. During World War II, there were a lot of wealthy people involved on the side of Germany and England and America, and people know about the Rothschilds and Volkswagen making the tanks and the German munition makers and then other munition makers. In all of your studying, have you ever come across the idea in either meetings that you knew Hitler might have had with other people, do you think it's possible that Hitler was a puppet?
Was a what?
A puppet.
A puppet.
A puppet of who?
That's what I want to know.
You mean that Hitler was taking orders from somebody else?
Well, either involved with people that were involved in the war. You would have to have, like, inside information.
No, I really don't think that Hitler was a madman who considered himself as the great leader and would not take orders or certainly not even recommendations
from anybody else,
from other people. I don't think that he could be. He didn't have the mentality to be a puppet of anybody.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, to say that Hitler would be a puppet would almost to start kind of arguing for his innocence, Stuart.
Argue his innocence at all. I just wondered if all the powerful people were involved in moving him around in some of his actions.
No, they never moved. He moved other people around.
That's what I was wondering from your experience, if that might have happened. That's just
I can't imagine that. In fact, a lot of people would like to have moved him around, and if they didn't agree with him, he'd just kill him.
Yeah, and interesting thought, though, Stuart. And Himmler is a good example. You write about him a lot in the book, and even Himmler was afraid that he would get the noose if he tried. I mean, there was just so much influence you could exert on Hitler, and if you really tried to stand against him, you wouldn't have been standing for long.
You're absolutely right.
All right, let's get to Becky. She's in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, on the wildcard line on Coast to Coast AM for Dan Kurzman. Becky?
Oh, my gosh, I got disconnected like 2 times.
I know. We got you back on again. Glad to do it. You have a question?
The lady who answers your phone, she rocks.
Yeah, she's tried to help you. I appreciate it. Gina's wonderful.
My husband is in the military. He's a major. We're here stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Just got here after a tour to Iraq. I am a very big, huge World War II buff. We were living in Mannheim, Germany. I am also a Catholic. And just to address some of the other people who have already spoken, I don't see Hitler as being a puppet of anyone. I see him as being someone who pulls everyone else's strings. And in that regard, I would consider maybe the Pope had strings that were pullable.
Yeah, I think that's...
believe in, any kind of anti-Semitism or anti-Hitlerism, but just like a protection of a country. I mean, because the Vatican is its own country.
Right.
I mean, you're not just protecting the physical country, but everything that is in the catacombs beneath the city of the Vatican. The assassination attempt, could it be or have been an attempt at Hitler trying to take over the next most powerful man on the globe?
You're absolutely right, and that's especially why the plot was conceived in the first place, because he was afraid that the Pope would be the main obstacle to him after the war, because he thought he'd win the war, of course, and the Pope he feared would stand in the way of him controlling the rest of the world. So that's very true. I agree with that.
You know what's interesting, too, about your book, and I have to say, as somebody who's I just am endlessly fascinated with World War II, in particular with the rise of Nazism. And it just to speak in general to a couple of callers, it's so interesting, especially when in the detail that you give in the life of General Wolfe and Himmler. It really is the best example, I think, in history of when a whole country and their and millions of people fall through the looking glass, and white becomes black and night becomes day, and it's so upside down, and you can see it reflected even in the conversations that Himmler is having with the central character of the book, General Wolf.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. But I would like to point out the climax of this whole thing, because several months after the Jews were, most of the Jews were saved, and the plot, to take over the Vatican was at least shelved. Wolf managed to get a meeting with the Pope, which is really extraordinary because the Pope had never received any high Nazi officer before. And he went in to see the Pope dressed in civilian clothes so Hitler wouldn't know about this, because if Hitler knew about it, he would have gone mad. So they had this meeting, and Wolf promised that he would do his best to stop any future plots against them, and they became quite friendly, as a matter of fact. And the Pope actually blessed him and his family. And then, as Wolf was getting ready to leave, he stood up and he clicked his heels together, and incredibly enough, he forgot which god was which, and he gave the Pope the Nazi salute. And of course, the Pope was a bit surprised, to say the least, but he smiled forbearingly. After all, Wolf had simply forgotten who his God was for the moment.
Right.
With this, it was symbolized the fact that Wolf did an incredible feat that probably no other human being ever did. He managed to win the full confidence of both the Vicar of Christ and the Antichrist simultaneously. And this is really an incredible situation, but he managed to achieve that feat.
Did he ever find faith? Did he ever find faith other than his belief in Nazism?
What's that?
Did he ever find faith again? Did he ever, after this encounter with the Pope?
No, not really. I don't think he was a very religious man.
Interesting.
But what he did was, and would help to save his life, aside from the fact that the Pope might have spoken out for him, was that he, as head of the SS in Italy, he had great power, and what he did was turn over the whole German army in Italy to the Americans. Allen Dulles was the OSS. He turned over the army to him, and as a result of that, and not necessarily because of the Pope's influence, he was not charged at Nuremberg, and he was, and Wolf was simply put. Later, the German a German court itself accused him of atrocities and put him in jail for a few years. And that's when he got out of jail. That's when I met him. But you can see what an opportunist he was.
Sure.
And Dulles felt that how could he put it in charge him at Nuremberg for what happened years earlier. When the guy, took the whole German army out of Italy, and perhaps saved a lot of lives as a result of that.
Well,
so Wolf was a pretty clever guy. In the end, he beat out the hangman, and although I must say that he died a very poor man, and when I asked him if he had lived his life, could leave his life over again, would he do the same thing? And he said, well, he says, I was young, I was a general, it was such a good life, and so I think perhaps he would have done it over again.
Well, let's go with let's do this. We have so many people want to talk to you. Just Dan, I'll ask you to keep your answers short and the questions short, and hopefully we can get everybody on the air west of the Rockies. Chuck is in Canada on Coast to Coast AM. Chuck.
Good morning, Ian.
Morning.
Good morning, Dan. I'd like to preface my question with a couple of quotes, if I may.
Got to be quicker because we're really trying to get everybody on the air. So,
okay. Well, in the book, The Transformation of the Republic by C. Wilcox, Franz von Papen, the papal nuncio, in 1939, stated that the Third Reich is a first world power which not only acknowledges but also puts into practice the high principles of the papacy. Now that was in reference to the death camps. And then 2 days after Hitler's death, the Vatican issued a communique out of Franco's press from Madrid calling Hitler son of the Catholic Church who died while defending Christianity. Now,
I've never heard that.
It seems that there was like a little symbiotic.
Well, there were some German.
Pius XII.
Wait, hold on. Wait, Chuck, let's get ahead. Dan's got an answer. So if you want,
some German clerics, bishops, and others who were taken in by Hitler, and until the very end supported him. But that was not the feeling of the Vatican itself, and certainly not of Pope Pius.
Let's go to east of the Rockies. Michael has a question for Dan Kurzman on Coast to Coast AM. Michael?
Yes, Mr. Kurzman, you have not given enough perspective on this. Adolf Hitler became the chief spokesman of the Nazi Party immediately after World War I. He spoke all over Germany, giving speeches wherever he could find an audience. For years and years and years, for 15 years, in fact, he could garner almost no support until right near the end when somebody gave Hitler the idea of organizing in the churches. Now, you mentioned Martin Bormann's son, and if you saw the Time Life series or the color pictures that they did on it, they showed the little child there with Martin Bormann and Adolf Hitler in the Catholic Church being named as the godfather of the child. You told us that there was 40% of Germany was Catholic, 40% of the army is Catholic, but you didn't tell us what percentage of the Nazi Party was Catholic and what percentage of the SS and the Gestapo were Catholic.
Well, let's find out then. Do you know about that, Dan?
Well, I don't know the exact percentage, but there were a lot of, Hitler tried to get all the people in the SS to leave the church, and he failed. Very few did. I don't know the exact percentage of those who remained, in the SS, remained Catholic, but very few of them gave up their religion. And but taking the army as a whole, 40% of them were Catholic, and they did not give up their religion.
First-time caller line, Chris is in Virginia for Dan Kurzman on Coast to Coast AM.
I did a thesis paper in college about Adolf Hitler, and Stuart's question, if I'm correct, Hitler had relied so heavily on his generals, like Goering with Messerschmitt, because he was a part of the Luftwaffe, that, that's what he did. But my question, I have kind of like two questions real quick. One, did Adolf Hitler join with Mussolini, and Mussolini kind of join with the Pope to kind of like befriend him, to kind of like, in a way, go around his back and assassinate him, to kill him? And my second question...
I understand. Did Hitler what?
I don't think I understand that.
Join, I get with Mussolini, and Mussolini kind of, like go to the Vatican and kind of like, well, since he was in this, in Italy, kind of like befriend the the Pope at the time.
No, Mussolini never befriended the Pope. He was, in fact,
so Hitler. Since he allied with Mussolini,
Hitler was allied with Mussolini. Mussolini wasn't necessarily anti-Semitic as such, but when he went with, as a matter of fact, a lot of Jews were doing pretty well under him during before Mussolini went together with Hitler. But he went with Hitler because he needed Hitler to support him, and he followed his policies to the end. But he never he and the Pope had never gotten along, and he would have tried to destroy the Pope if he had the opportunity.
Well, I'm grateful for both keeping the questions short and the answers short. We just may get everybody in after all. Peter's on the wild card line in Chicago on the Big 89 for Dan Kurzman. Peter?
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you much for the opportunity. After he was elected in 1939, Pius XII issued an encyclical, Summi Pontificatus, and in their encyclical repudiated Nazism, fascism, communism. The Allies dropped by air 80,000 copies over Germany. After the war, Golda Meir stood before the United Nations and said, and it's very brief here, during the 10 years of Nazi terror, when our people went through the horrors of martyrdom, the Pope raised his voice to condemn the persecutors and to commiserate with their victims. The life of our time has been enriched by a voice that expressed the great moral truths above the tumults of daily conflict. And the third thing, there are so many others, is that the chief rabbi of Rome, Israel Zoli, converted to Catholicism. He was so impressed by Pius' heroism and charity toward the Jews, and he took Eugenio as his name of baptism, that being, of course, Pius's name prior to being
I go into that in quite detail.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's very interesting. So, yeah, if that's an answer to what other people have said, a lot of this information is in the book. I feel like, in a way, Dan, there are people who are debating things without having read the book yet, which is fair because it's new. And I think they might be surprised when they actually read how much of what they're talking about is being not in the book is in the book. And I think they'd enjoy it. Wildcard line, Joseph is in Washington, D.C. for Dan Kurzman on Coast to Coast AM. Joseph?
Good morning. How are you doing?
Terrific. Thank you. We're trying to get everybody in. Go ahead.
Excellent. Dan, I am one of the members of the Pacelli family, and I have a quick statement from the family for you and then a question. We've been listening this evening, and we would like to thank you for the manner in which you have assembled and presented the detailed information concerning our ancestor, Eugenio. You're raising important facts. It's reassuring to us that scholars such as yourself are still in pursuit of the truth relevant to Eugenio's role during the Second World War. So, on behalf of the family, thank you. The question I have for you is, do you have any plans to continue your research and present it in further books on Pope Pius XII?
I don't know. That depends. I haven't made up my mind what I'm going to do in the future right now. But perhaps I would. But all I've tried to do with this book is to put things in perspective. I'm a journalist. I was with the Washington Post for many years, and I just wanted to put it in perspective because I read so many books which made it sound like that Pius was really a devil of some kind, and I had no views about this until I looked into it, and I just wanted to find, as a good journalist, what really was the truth, and it's a complicated situation. It's not a question of whether he's evil or not. I mean, he was a human being, and he had his faults, and he made a lot of errors, like you and I do, and I just try to put the thing together like that without saying, that he's either a saint or